everyone. This is Doug Howard with Growth Team Strategies, back for another episode of Selling the Dream. And I'm here with my illustrious partner, Kathi Fleck. Kathi, how are you doing today?
Great, Doug. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I need to find a descriptive word for you for every one of these broadcasts. So today it's going
I'm
to be,
afraid.
it'll be good for a while until it won't be. But that's okay. That's all right. It'll all be good. So today, as we continue to talk about strategies for the best ways to get your business ready to be sold or to sell or transition the business, we're going to talk a little bit about determining who might be a good buyer for your business, right? And so whether it's somebody that you've already identified as a successor or somebody that's within the organization that you have that might be a candidate or maybe a couple of people, or even if we're going out to the open market, I think it's helpful to start thinking about who would be a likely candidate, what their circumstances might be, might help us be able to figure out where they are and how to find them. So, so Kathi, what do you think about in terms of figuring out who might buy the business?
Yeah, there's so many opportunities, even acquisition. An HVAC company that I worked with was buying up other HVAC and plumbing companies in order to grow his business. Some people have family members that have grown up in the business, and they're a good candidate because they know it, understand it, love it. It's a good match. Other kids don't want anything to do with the parents' business, so they have to go find somebody else. But I think there's a lot of opportunities. Certainly selling to employees is one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the two biggest mistakes I see people make is to assume that someone's going to take over and that conversation really hasn't been fully vetted, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had a client years ago that just in talking to me always talked about their son taking over the business. And years later, as we were getting closer to the time that dad wanted to have that conversation and share some financial information, and we shared this with the son was kind of surprised and said, well, I'm not sure exactly why you're telling me all this. And dad said, well, because I want you to, be ready to take over the business. And son said, dad, that's not my plan. I'm going to stay here as long as you're here, but then I'm going to do something else. And dad was kind of surprised. He kind of assumed that was going to be his succession. And so I think that, sometimes that can be surprising. The other mistake I see people make way the other way is they have informal conversations with people about possibly being an owner one day or having a stake that maybe are premature, maybe aren't even with the right person. And later on find out maybe that person feels like a commitment's been made to them that maybe really wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm. Or shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
And I know when I was thinking of selling my business and I brought some different management type people on, I had that same thinking, maybe this person can grow into the business. And then I'm sure a few months later, that person decided he hated the job and he left. And so I thought, well, and it takes time to get that person ready to run the business or even understand it. And not every employee, whether it's a relative or a very successful employee, really wants to take that ownership role.
No, that's exactly right. And I think it's even harder when you're thinking about multiple people, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'll say, well, I'll hear someone say, I have like 3 kids in the business and, I'm going to leave it to them. And it's like, well, what does them mean? Is that a 3-way partnership? Is one of them taking the lead? Do they even get along with each other? So there's that kind of a thing. And then sometimes when it's people that aren't even related at all, the idea, well, these two would work well together. These two belong together. And it's like, well, it's kind of hard to, it's kind of like an arranged marriage. You really can't put that together for somebody else.
Right. Yeah. Well, I had another friend who brought his son on into the business. This gentleman had the business for, 30 years and then brought his adult son into the business, expecting him to run the business. And he wasn't very successful with it. He didn't take over that role, but he was really good in the carpentry role. And so he's learning that, not with any intention of taking over the dad's business. So I think those expectations really have to be fleshed out early on so that a good path can be made.
What about when you actually go out to market, right? I know you had this experience, and I know even when you're working with a broker and things like that, they have some ideas in mind about where they might find somebody or what might be appealing. But What did you feel like was kind of the thought process or your responsibility for starting to think about who might be a potential buyer?
And that's a good question. Well, having a remodeling business, I thought somebody in construction might come
Right.
on.
Yeah.
Um, I thought maybe a general manager type person. One person that I interviewed was from Oregon, and I thought would have been a great candidate for buying the business. And he was actually a general manager, had sales, production background, and he was looking to buy his own business. So
Hmm.
as he gave it some thought, he thought, well, why am I going to move my family all the way from Oregon to Texas when I can just start a business right here? And so, it's got to make sense for the buyer.
Yeah.
uh, Another person I met with through the broker decided he wanted to be a partner and come in and be a partner with me, and that really wasn't where I was wanting to go, so that didn't go anywhere. So there's a lot of different thoughts that people have.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, in certain industries, a larger company will buy a smaller company. Sometimes it's
Right.
a little bit the other way around, right? So I remember when I had the accounting practice, it was very beneficial if you found a larger accounting practice that wanted to buy your book of business, because
Mhm.
then they didn't repeat all the overhead costs, right?
Right.
They
Yeah.
already had an office, they already had a copy machine, and they just added revenue basically. I know sometimes when we look at things like in the remodeling business, you know, it's unlikely that someone's going to want a bigger company's going to want to buy a smaller company unless maybe they're looking for a new territory. I'm in Birmingham, but I'd also like to be in Huntsville, Alabama, or something
Right.
like that. But sometimes I think there are folks that can grow their business to a certain size, can't get it big enough, and they don't want to spend the time it's going to take to get to that point, and they may become really good candidates for sort of buying themselves into a situation
Mhm.
that would take them years to grow into.
Right. Right. And then there's a private equity. I think there were a few private equity firms that looked at my business, but mine wasn't large enough. So I think that if there's somebody who can run the business and the private equity firm comes in, then they could have a good opportunity to sell to them as well.
Yeah, yeah. I also think it helps a little bit when you start thinking about who a likely buyer could be. It helps make some decisions about things that you might need to do in the business in the interim. You
True.
know,
Hmm.
Sometimes people say to me, well, the right buyer for my company is going to be somebody that can go out and really produce sales. And it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, how strong are we operationally, or how strong are we in other areas? Or sometimes it's great if the business owner has been the salesperson to say, let's build a sales capability. Let's get a second salesperson on board. Now you've opened up that possibility of potential buyers out there to include somebody that isn't great at sales because you have a sales capacity,
Yeah.
right? But a lot of times, I told someone the other day that when you build a company that takes a superhero to run it, the options out there to find another superhero to buy it are pretty limited,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
so it's a lot easier if you can say, well, I could do these 4 or 5 things. And most founders of companies, I think, are pretty used to having to get good at just lots of different things. But if you can kind of hone in a couple of pieces that the company has, either through its staffing or processes, whatever, and now that prospective buyer only has to be good at 1 or 2 things,
It'll be
you just
easier for
you
them.
open up the possibilities, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think the other thing that seems to happen that I've seen quite a bit is I see some business owners not looking at the big picture. They're looking at what they want to happen, such as they want to sell it to their employees, and maybe their employees are not the right solution, but they're not really looking at maybe going to a broker or going to somebody who can actually buy the business. So they end up jeopardizing the opportunity to really sell the business and provide the future for the staff.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's done with the best of intentions. I want the best for my team, or they've earned the right to have a chance at this, or even with someone's own kids. But nobody wants to give someone that opportunity and then have them fail,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I agree.
And and so I think sometimes the best thing you can do if that's the situation you're in is to say, the best thing I can do for those folks is to make sure that someone takes over the business that
Mhm.
can continue to give them the structure and opportunity they want, And sometimes I've seen, and it's rare, but where a business owner will say, my son or daughter wants to be in the business, but they're not the person that should be running it. So me finding the right buyer gives them 20 more years of
Yes,
career.
yes. I think that's a much better solution than hoping and wishing that they're going to be able to take it over.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard because sometimes, folks are your friends. Sometimes they
Mhm.
feel like they've been with you through thick and thin. It's also hard, to sometimes evaluate the skill set of your own kids, you
Yeah.
know. And I know these are some of the most uncomfortable conversations that I
Hmm.
have with folks sometimes to say, well, this is your area of expertise, but your son or daughter, they're not you. And they may
Yeah.
be great at some other things, but you're putting attributes on them that they don't have, or maybe interests on them that they don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard decision to make. And I think it should be more objective, where a lot of business owners take it very personally because it's really their baby, and it was mine too. But I think in order to really make the best decision for the company, they have to get outside of that very personal, subjective perspective and look at it more as an outsider, and in order to be able to make the best decision for the company and the people.
Yeah. But it does seem like even early on, it's a good thought process to go through some good conversations, maybe to have with other people, to pay attention to what's going on in your particular industry.
Mhm.
Like where a buyer's likely to come from. I think it also helps if you're in a geography that is particularly desirable. I mean, I love Texas, but mostly that's because I like the barbecue, right? So, but there are some folks that say, listen, I would love to find a business in that geography because that's where I'd like to retire to, or that's where I'd like to
Mhm.
eventually end up, or I just, really like that area. And I think when you're in those areas, it broadens also, who might be a possible
True.
candidate, even
Mhm.
within your own industry, right? I mean, to be able to reach out even through some associations and organizations and say, hey, you know, if it's wintertime, and it's 12 degrees where you are, like, look at me sitting by the pool. Imagine if you could, fix cars or cut hair or build homes and then go sit by the pool, or vice versa. So I think those things are all possibilities. But I
Mhm.
think people, the earlier they start brainstorming, right? It's
I
like
do.
these vision boards people do. It's like
Hmm.
start to envision who might be a buyer for the business.
And I think once they do that, then they can get away from the really personal, subjective perspective that they might have. It's wishful thinking. It would have been wishful easy for me, I think, if I could have sold it to employees, but it just wasn't a good option. So, but I
Yeah,
think if they start thinking about it early on, then they can start becoming a lot more realistic with their decisions.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think, leaving those options open is super important. And, there's ways to reassure your team that, hey, no matter what I do with this business, it's going to be something to keep the business going and solid and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
I think people sometimes are way too quick to say, don't worry about it. When I leave, you can take it over or
Mhm.
whatever. And like you said, Kathy, sometimes it's not even what the person wants,
Yeah,
right?
true.
And so I think, yeah, good stuff. All right. So, like always, we're always encouraging folks to think about this stuff early and often. But starting to picture who that buyer might be is a positive thing. So, thanks again, Kathy, for your great input. Another fun conversation.
Good talking to you.
All right. Selling the dream. We'll be talking to you again sometime soon. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Selling the Dream podcast starring Doug Howard and Kathi Fleck. Both Doug and Kathi have built and sold successful businesses and hope this podcast will help other small business owners do the same. Tune in every week to hear more tips for increasing the value of your company so you get the highest return for your years of hard work when it comes time to sell or transition your business. Can't wait till next week? Check out our website for more information at www.growththemes.com.